Hello everyone, my name is Jean-Christophe, and today I'm going to teach you about Lambda functions in Python. What is a Lambda function in Python? It is an anonymous expression. It is essentially a function without a function name. So it can take any number of arguments, including no arguments, but it only has a single expression. So let's look at how this works. So essentially, lambda is just a shorter way to define a simple function and that has a single expression. So how it works, the lambda syntax is that you take in some argument, one, zero, or multiple, and you have just one expression and you can execute it. So let's make a simple example of how is structured a lambda function. So the first thing is you can say, okay, I have a lambda x and x plus 1. So that's our structure for a lambda function. If we run this, you'll see that it just returned function main. So it hasn't been called yet. In order to call this, we'll see later how to call it. Next, you can have a different number of arguments. So you can say x, y, z, and say print x, y, z. So you can see a lambda function can have multiple arguments here, but it has a single expression. You can also have lambda without a single argument by saying just print hello lambda. So you don't need actually any argument. If we run this, we still have just a function. And we have an example of how we can use this. You can say uh, lambda function and you can assign it to a variable. And in this case, you get print a lambda. And if we call that variable, then we can see it still returns that function main. If you want to execute the lambda function, you have some idea what's going on here is you use a parenthesis right there. And then you call that lambda function, and that's how you use lambda. That's the simplest way. If you have multiple arguments, for example, you can, let's see later. There's a second way you can actually execute a lambda function without assign it to a variable because lambda functions want to be anonymous. So you don't want to assign it, for example. So you could just say, okay, lambda x equals print hello, and then you return this. It's missing the argument. Okay, yeah, sorry. You just print and you return this. If you want to add an argument, then you would say print. You could say lambda x, and you could say hello x, and then here you could say hello JC, and then you can provide that argument within the next parenthesis. So that's a second way you can execute a lambda function. If you have a single argument in your lambda, we've just looked at it, but single argument, and you do lambda x plus 1 as we have just seen. Then in order to call the single argument function, lambda function, you just use this parenthesis. If you run it, we'll have the same type error that we just discussed. Then you can put a number instead and get the actual result. You can also have multiple arguments as we hinted earlier. And to do this, you do lambda x, y, and then you can say x plus y. So that can be one function with multiple arguments, and you have to think that the order that you define them is the order that you're going to have to define them. So 3 plus 1, and that's how you can call a lambda function with any number of arguments. So what exactly does lambda do? In Python, lambda is a function and it returns a lambda expression for that argument. It is very similar to um, how function identity function works. So if you are used to defining function using the def keyword, let's say a def func, you have x for the argument and then return x plus 1. So that's essentially if you run this function and you do x2, you will do replace x by 2 and it's going to return 3. The lambda function is very similar. And as we have seen, lambda func equal lambda x plus 1. So if we do check whether or not lambda function does the same thing, we can see that x2 and lambda function 2 is equal to 3, true in that case, showing that the results of this function and the result of this function will return the same thing. You can use Panda, Python Lambda inside functions. So Python supports functional programming, so you can return a function as the result of another function. So we can take a function that we say it will increment n and return, and instead of just doing some number n plus 1, for example, as an incrementer, what we want to know is we want to use a lambda function that will have x plus n. So in this case, if we take the incrementer function and we assign it to f and we say that the incrementer is 10, we're still missing something here. We don't know what x is. We've defined n here using 10, so n equal 10. So in order to use this, what we want to do is we want to take f, the lambda function, and we want to give it the value of x. And if we return this, we'll see that it returns 12. So we can print some results and we can also use it and to assign it to a new function. So we can say instead of the incrementer of n equal 10, we can say the incrementer is n equal 3 instead. And then if we print all of this, we'll see the difference between changing the incrementer. We can see that we're calling a function, another function, using the lambda expression. So when should you use Python Lambda? You can use Python Lambda to sort a list of tuples. So here we have a list of tuples. And let's say we want to sort that list using the 1, 2, 3. So we want to sort them in order of appearance. We can use Lambda for that. So we can say, okay, sorted pair. So that's the variable when we want to sort this. We can use the sorted function in Python. We pass in the pairs, and we can define which key we want to use. And in this case, for the key, we're going to pass in the lambda x, and we're going to select the first value of x. That means x will be the tuple that will be passed, and we will return the first value here. So that's what we do. We sort based on the first key, and if we do sorted pair here, you'll see that it's sorted from 1 to 4, and if we were to use lambda 1, it would be sorted alphabetically 4, 1, 3, 2 instead of by numbers. We can also define a function by using if-else statement. So we can say result equal, and we want to, so the structure it does is it takes a one line if else, so we say lambda x, and we say return greater than 5 if x is greater than 5, else return smaller than 5. So that's a one-liner if-else statement. You can learn about this in a separate video tutorial. But let's say if we want to test, we can say that this one should return greater than 5 and this one should return smaller than 5. And that is indeed the case. There are other very cool things that we can do with Lambda functions is that we can take a list, range 6. So let's start with this and show the nums. and we say that we have a list of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say we want to just keep the even numbers. So what we can do is we can use the filter function. So when I say we want to keep just the even number, that means I want to use a filter to to keep only these. So I can do lambda x. And in order to get filters, there is the very useful modulo function that we can use. So if modulo 2 equals 0, and then the filter function requires me to pass in the list, and then I can see I have indeed managed to filter to keep only even numbers. If I want to do other mathematical operations, I can do so by using the map function instead. So if I want to square every single item, I would do list map. I will map lambda x x2 and nums, and that will return the square value. So essentially, it will map all the values from nums times 2. Here you can see that it works. So it's super useful because you can start by a project by putting all your mathematical operations. So you can say, I want to add, subtract, I want to divide. So you can see that I can create a single um, function for every single possible mathematical operation that I want to do in my project. So I can define it at first and then I can just call them like that and not focus on doing it ever again later on. So that is a very useful way of using panda functions. You can also do this with strings. Let's say I have a list of emails. I can also use list maps to do other more complex operation. List map, and I can say lambda, and let's not call it X, but email instead, just because we can. And we do split, and then we split on the a ampersand. And essentially we want to keep just the domain. So essentially what we're doing here is we're mapping, taking a list here and we map it, the lambda function, then we return the emails and we get those strings. As we can see here, we're starting to get in the realm of the a little bit more complex notation, and maybe a loop would be simpler, but I'll let that up to you. So the next piece is the place where I use lambda function the most. Is generally I have a panda data frame and I want to apply some operation to the score column. So I want to apply something to every item in a score column. And that is one of the powerful way that lambda can do, of what lambda can do. So you can do score purse. So let's say we want to convert the point notation, the float notation to a percentage string. We can say df score, and we use the apply function that will essentially go through each item and apply a function. And in this case, the function is a lambda function. X will take in the value, so it will go first X, second X, and for each item it will loop X. Let's say I want to create a F string that ends up as a percentage, and I need to put int X times 100. So in that case, if I run this and I print the df again, you can see I've added a new column with the string notation for the percentage. Now we can also use, and now we're getting into a little bit the more complex things, but I want to show you how you can use lambda function as a decorator. So let's say you have a function and you want to convert it. So let's start with the lambda function. So I have my lambda function, and the lambda function equals is hello world. So I have that lambda function that just essentially just does hello world, and the output that I want is something that is calling something like hello lambda. That's the output that I want to do. So I can create a decorator function. So I can say my decorator, and it takes a function as an input. So it takes the lambda function as an input, and I put the wrapper inside. So I'm not going too deep into what decorators are, but let's take result, and I have lambda function. So essentially it runs the lambda function and it returns decorated result. So that's what the function does, and then it returned the wrapper. It takes in this. So how you use that decorator, then you can use decorated lambda equals my decorator, my lambda. So you pass in the lambda function to the decorator, and if we return this, it should return what we were trying to do, which is decorated hello world. So this is it. Thanks for following me. Please hit like and subscribe, and or follow me on one of my website or social media. Thank you very much. See you next time.